There are some eclectic stories of sort of Brian Montgomery, and the exhibitor parties were all held at the Savoy Hotel, and the 50 top exhibitors had a very full-on dinner, in the run-up to the show, and were incredibly well looked after, and it was another world. So
you mean you don't do this now for IFE and the other shows?
Sadly not.
Good morning. This week's Exhibition News videocast is with Damion Angus, who is the Chief Executive of the Montgomery Group. Welcome, Damion. And Damion, as we both know very well, this is the 100th anniversary of the AEO. We have our big celebration at the NEC on December the 10th. Anybody listening, please go onto the AEO website and see all the details. So that's going to be the celebration of 100 years of the AEO. And Damion, Montgomery is the only company which has been a member of the AEO for the whole of those 100 years. Do you feel the hand of history upon you?
It's pretty staggering, isn't it? I mean, I was talking to Sandy Angus, who is obviously our chairman, and the next generation up, and trying to get as much information from him as to the sort of history he remembers. And he was going back to the sort of early 1970s when Brian Montgomery tried to bring, I suppose, the AEO back after probably many years of not being very present. And they found a guy called Commander Jerry Rickson, I believe, out of the Royal Navy to head it up.
Yeah.
And it was actually in a room literally above me that's about sort of 8 meters squared and very small, and had a sort of eclectic mix of small members at the time who were predominantly trade associations. So people like SMMT from the motor show.
That's right, yeah.
Furniture Manufacturers Association and so on. So everything sort of seemed to be reborn out of here through Brian. And if you could see the room now, it's actually our server room. So it's a very different place.
Yeah, I mean, there were 7 original members, of which Montgomery was one, of course. I think it was it Gilbert Montgomery, or can't remember. One of your original.
Greville. There was Hugh Greville. Greville was certainly
Hugh
one
Greville.
of the.
That's right. Hugh Greville Montgomery represented Montgomery at that first meeting, which was in June 1921, and there were 7 people, and there was a baking show. And a fishing show and a number of others, but you are the only one that has survived that 100 years, which is remarkable, and many congratulations. And going back there, it was Greville Montgomery who founded the company back in 1895, I think, and was that with the building show originally?
It was indeed. So he had the building show, which ran at the sort of agricultural hall at the time, before then moving on to Olympia. And that really was the foundation of Montgomery going through the early and middle ages in terms of the sort of mainstay of the business. And that really went through till, I suppose, the sort of 1970s. Or actually late 60s, when we headed into South Africa, and then later in the early 70s into sort of Bahrain and Singapore. And it was really based on who Brian Montgomery met and whether they could entice him into another territory as to whether he went. It was nothing to do probably whether there was an opportunity or not. So he literally just followed his nose. And I think in Singapore, we ran our first show. There was an oil and gas show in the Hyatt Hotel car park. So it was.
Wouldn't they let you into the hotel?
Exactly.
Yeah. But I mean, the building show became Interbuild, didn't it? And Interbuild was, and I think still is, although the show has morphed, of course. But I think it ran longer than any other trade show or any other exhibition ever has in the UK, including the Motor Show and Ideal Home. Its longevity was longer than any other show.
Absolutely, it ran through actually just until before I arrived, sort of I suppose 15 or 17 years ago. So no, it did. It as I say, it was the brand that the rest of the business was built on, and the brand that enabled us to do what we do now. And at the time, I mean, there were some eclectic stories of sort of Brian Montgomery, and the exhibitor parties were all held at the Savoy Hotel, and the 50 top exhibitors had a very full-on dinner, in the run up to the show, and were incredibly well looked after, and it was another world. So
you mean you don't do this now for IFE and the other shows?
Sadly not.
And you and I were talking a couple of weeks ago about the company used to be called Andre Montgomery, and I asked you where the name Andre Montgomery came from, and you said you really weren't sure, but you'd do a little bit of research on it, and I think you have. If you can explain to us where Andre Montgomery came from.
Yeah, so we were the building trades exhibition up until I think about 1974. And then Brian Montgomery's mother, Molly Montgomery, was called Molly Audrey Montgomery. And her and Brian used to go off to, I believe it was Hungary for their summer holidays, and had friends out there. And these friends always used to write back to her, calling her Andre Montgomery rather than Audrey. And at the time of looking for a new name for the company, she felt that actually Andre was a much more sort of neutral name, and was far better than Audrey, and hence it stuck. So yeah, it's funny how these things come. I'd always heard that actually it's to do with her wanting to be higher up in a directory with an A rather than an M. But I think, again, that's probably just old stories.
I say that's very, very logical. Herbert Chapman did the same with Arsenal when he changed the name from the Arsenal to Arsenal, so that Arsenal would be first in the list of league clubs. And also there is an Andre who is the president of Mozambique at the moment. I don't know whether there's any connection. You don't have any shows in Mozambique, I don't think. Looking at your...
Not at the moment. But yeah.
There's a story about Lord Mountbatten abandoning his script at one of the shows to go off and demonstrate a Dyson vacuum cleaner. Is that the case?
That's right. Yeah, that was he was sort of one of many sort of royalty and sort of famous names that sort of came through. I mean, we had everyone from sort of George V and Queen Mary through to the Queen Mother, Prince Charles and Diana separately. And then people such as sort of Nelson Mandela opened our mining show in South Africa. So, I think through the historic ages, we've had lots of royalty and great names come through the shows. And we run a lot of art fairs as well, and also great artists, people such as Hockney, who drew the poster for our LA Art Fair in '86. And so, yeah, some great sort of stories and visitors. So.
Let's talk about, you have such a wide range of events, and you have them in so many different places, that you must have been hit in many ways much harder by the pandemic than most organizations, because you had to take into account what's happening in so many different places. And just looking at the list of shows coming up, you've got shows in Lagos and Johannesburg coming up very, very soon. I mean, what is the situation in Nigeria and South Africa vis-a-vis COVID at the moment?
So, I mean, the African countries are all sort of based on our decision is based on government stance, really. So in Nigeria, you are still allowed to run events. The travel implications or corridors are tricky, but our team flew out a couple of days ago and are now ensconced on the ground in Lagos. And whilst the show is going to be considerably smaller, we are able to run it, and it will be the second show out, since the pandemic hit. So, that at the moment is all right. South Africa is a different story. They've gone from a level 3 to a level 2, which is a slight improvement. But ultimately, it's pretty hard to run any events at the moment. We own part of a venue down there as well, and we're seeing very few shows being able to run at all this year. So I think it'll be Q1 of next year before really there's enough confidence, and the government have put in the stage 1 level that events can run fairly easily. So it depends. I mean, the same as in Kenya, the market in Kenya, people want to exhibit, they want to take part in shows, and if they were legally allowed to, they would do. But again, there's a 60-day ban on events, and unfortunately, a couple of our events fit under that 60-day ban, so we've had to push them back. I think the nice thing about Africa, or the interesting thing about Africa is obviously COVID is not the biggest threat to people necessarily on the ground there. There are plenty of other things to be thinking about, and actually doing business and putting money back on the table is what people are focused on at the moment.
Yeah, are there any, I am talking about South Africa, of which we have read a great deal. I've not personally been to South Africa for nearly 2 years, but we've read a great deal about the issues, the COVID issues and other issues there. Are there any particular issues in South Africa which are different from, say, the UK or the States or other markets?
I mean, it's I suppose on a international basis, South Africa is obviously on the tip of the continent and is quite a long way from anywhere else. So, in terms of if there are travel restrictions in place, and obviously one of the virus strains was known as, the sort of South African strain. And so I think it may well have a slightly unfair sort of connotation to it. But I think internationally, it's probably harder to get people coming in. Having said that, a lot of the shows are local and can survive perfectly well without that. I think the difficulty is it's been a long time for suppliers down there. The market is smaller than certainly the UK market, and it's harder to survive. There's very little support. So when things dry up, it has a profound effect across the whole of the exhibition industry, and we're certainly seeing that in terms of both venues and suppliers and organisers. So I think it will be it's much tougher, I feel, than a lot of other markets.
I mean, we've read also an enormous amount about India over the last few months as well. You've got the Indian Art Fair, haven't you, relatively soon in February, I think, in New Delhi. How is that? How is the situation in India? How are you dealing with that?
Yeah, again, I think, we were hoping, probably very naively, that we might get our show this year off the ground. And at the time, things in India were looking good. And then obviously the horrors hit and India went completely the other way.
Yeah.
That has since, I think, come back. And currently our team are very confident that we'll get the fair away and that there shouldn't be any problems. Again, lots of sort of local galleries, but there are international collectors who fly in, and therefore travel corridors again need to be open. But at this stage, I think we are quietly confident that that fair should run with few issues. And again, coming back to our earlier conversation, the demand for people to physically see art and get out there and buy is huge, and we're finding that across all our art fairs. People desperately want to get back out and be physically buying art.
You had a show a few days ago in the UK. Can you tell us how that went? I mean, because that was one of the first really 2 or 3 shows out of the blocks after the 1st of September, which was, from our point of view, from the event point of view, which was release date, wasn't it?
It was. So we had speciality in Fine Food Fair in Olympia. We were in there next to Plaza, who were running at the same time. And we were the first 2 shows out of Olympia. And I think none of us really knew what to expect, both in terms of, visitor numbers, but also how they would react in terms of checking on the door and confidence, really. And I think we were completely blown away by the response we got. Although the show was a bit smaller, the visitor numbers were incredibly strong. We had queues, nice queues, I add, going down the road once you were inside the show, you actually would have no idea that the crazy world around us was taking place, and that COVID was still here. There were, very few masks, but people were conversing openly and really excited to be back on the show floor and doing business. All our exhibitors, were telling great stories of good meetings they had. Visitors were going away happy. So I think that concern that we had was unfounded, and I think other organisers. I know you've had a few shows as well.
Yeah.
The general consensus is that they've been very successful, and the markets they serve have come back in strength. So I hope this is going to continue.
Was it a surprise?
I think based on the last 18 months, everything is, I don't take anything for granted anymore. And whilst our pre-reg figures actually were considerably up for the show, again, we had no idea whether that would convert or not.
Yeah.
And so it was a nice surprise, but we're looking forward to our next UK show in about 3.5 weeks' time. So,
I haven't personally, or none of my companies have done a show in Olympia so far. No, we do have one coming up this week. But how do you feel Olympia as a venue is handling things, is handling the protocols? I can speak about the NEC, but I can't speak about Olympia or Excel because we haven't held shows there yet.
Yeah, I suppose the thing about Olympia is because there are not communal entrances for multiple shows, you're coming into your own entrance to your own show. So you're very much in control as an organizer as to what sort of restrictions you put on people coming in. We followed the AEO guidelines, and people had to come in either with their COVID vaccination, or they had to take a test, or they had to have proof that they had antibodies and were covered over the last 180 days. And that went very smoothly. I think all three worked incredibly well. There were very few grumbles. People accepted that was the way to go. I think it provided a safe environment for people to do business, and it was very smooth. And again, I hope that three-tier system will remain. I know there's a lot of government discussion at the moment about putting it down to just COVID passports and
yes, just proof of vaccination. Yes,
yeah,
certainly appears to be the way it's going. By the time this is published, this goes out, it may well be that the government have included us as nightclubs and other events, so it has to be COVID vaccinations. Do you think that will be problematic for us?
I think with all these things, it's whether we get enough warning. If this is decided at the end of September, we have a show starting on the first Monday of October, so we are going to go out with messaging to everyone to say, these are the 3 criteria you need to get into the show.
Yeah.
And if then they arrive at the show and those aren't the 3 criteria, then we have lots of very unhappy people. So I think, again, it's plenty of warning to make sure that we're giving out the correct messaging. And to be honest, we had quite a large number of people taking tests on site.
Oh, that's interesting. Yeah.
Which, again, if you take that percentage out, and that's across both, contractors and visitors, but if you take that percentage out, you're obviously taking out a part of your community you don't want to. So I think that the 3 options actually serve our industry well, and as we all know, we're a very controlled environment where we can track and trace everyone, and therefore it should remain the case. But,
you were talking about a show in Olympia. I can talk about Autumn Fair and the security show in the NEC, which had very, very large numbers of visitors and exhibitors as well. The number of problems was very, very small indeed. There were a certain number of people who arrived saying, no, I didn't read any of those emails and I didn't realize I had to do this, but that was really very, very small and was dealt with very, very competently. The NEC is certainly very much on top of that. The protocols, which were essentially outside the NEC before you came into the curtilage of the the exhibition halls was handled very well. I mean, essentially, I didn't see anything that I could call a significant problem. And that was, of course, terribly encouraging, because the truth is we didn't know what was going to happen, did we? In particular, we didn't know whether a very, very large number of people would say, oh, well, I'm not going to bother going to the show because I haven't got this or I haven't got that, or it's all a bit too much trouble. That didn't seem to be the case at all. So,
no, I think people are desperate to get back out there and talk to their communities and find out what they're doing and what's coming up, and they're desperate to move on. So to give them a platform, a physical platform to do that, I think is invaluable.
Absolutely. So what about pivot to digital then?
Oh.
One of Lisa Hanamp's favourite cliches, pivot to digital.
It's a big one and a big topic. I mean, I think our view on all of the digital side is, not to race off and do anything too dramatic. We're a smaller business, and we can't afford to make the mistakes. So we would like to be fast followers of technology rather than necessarily breaking ground and spending the big money to work out what's working and what's not.
Yeah.
There's obviously technology in terms of making events running smoother and more effective on the ground. And then you've got the digital side of what people are calling omni-channel and delivering content and value throughout the year. And we've put a platform together, like many others have, that delivers, this content and ability to connect and transact with e-commerce through a Connect platform that we're developing. And we'll see how it goes. And I think there'll be lots of learning along the way. We'll see what works, what doesn't, and continue to adapt. But I still feel, that our sort of physical shows are the anchor that we need to focus on and get right over the next 12 months and re-establish. And really use digital events to deliver, the right leads and keep in touch with our communities.
Well, I mean, you've been doing it for 126 years, really rather successfully, and obviously keeping up with technical changes. I mean, that was pretty much before there were a significant number of motor cars and aeroplanes and you've certainly kept up with those trends. In fact, one of my favourite Montgomery shows is the Colliery show, which was 1904, and we have quite a lot of material from the Colliery show in 1904, which I hope that we can feature. It's outside the 100 years of the AEO, but the material is so good, I'm hoping we can feature posters and a lot of stills from the Colliery show in 1904 in the celebrations, because it's just such fantastic material. I imagine the Colliery show doesn't exist anymore.
It doesn't. I have to say, I don't really know what happened to it. That's a question for Sandy, but that's a long time ago.
Wonderful artwork. Yeah. Really good. Damion Angus, thank you very much indeed. Good luck with the future shows. Good luck in Nigeria. Good luck in South Africa. Good luck in India. Good luck in Kenya. Good luck in Kuala Lumpur. And thank you very much indeed.
Great to chat to you, Phil. Many thanks.